The Fool occupies position 0 in the Tarot's major arcana, a figure walking toward a cliff edge, attention fixed on the sky rather than the ground. Shakespeare placed a version of this figure in his courts, the only character permitted to speak truth to power, disguised as nonsense. Contemporary film repeats the pattern, the character written to be underestimated, who turns out to know more than anyone around them. The origin of this figure is not literary, it is psychological. Decades before the archetype became a stock character, a Swiss psychiatrist had already mapped its structure. This is the first of 3 parts. Part 1 addresses the psychology, Part 2 addresses the tarot symbolism, Part 3 addresses the storytelling archetype. Section 1, the myth versus the man. A correction is necessary before proceeding. Carl Jung did not write an essay titled The Fool. The version circulating online, the 12 Jungian archetypes, with the fool or jester listed alongside the hero, the sage, and the lover, is a later synthesis, not a primary text. It is a useful simplification, but it is not Jung's own framework. What Jung wrote about directly were 2 related concepts: the trickster, addressed in his 1954 essay on the psychology of the Trickster-Figure, and the Puer Aeternus, Latin for eternal child, addressed in the Archetypes and the collective unconscious. Both predate and underlie the popularized fool archetype. Neither is identical to it. This pattern of simplification is not unique to the fool. Joseph Campbell did the same when he built the hero's journey out of Jung's archetypal theory, a synthesis criticized by some scholars as cherry-picked. Part 3 returns to this comparison directly. Section 2, the trickster. Jung's trickster is not a literary device. It is, in his framing, an autonomous structure within the collective unconscious, a pattern that predates and exceeds any single story built around it. Jung described the trickster as a forerunner of the Savior, and a primitive cosmic being of divine animal nature, on the one hand superior to man because of his superhuman qualities, and on the other hand inferior to him because of his unreason and unconsciousness. The contradiction is the point. The trickster is simultaneously wise and foolish, creative and destructive, helpful and harmful, embodying opposites without resolving them. This is not a flaw in the archetype. It is the mechanism by which the archetype functions. Jung saw the trickster as serving a compensatory role, surfacing when consciousness becomes too rigid, one-sided, or inflated. The trickster does not appear to teach a lesson in the conventional sense. It appears to break a structure that has stopped adapting. The mythological range of this figure is broad. Hermes in Greek myth, Coyote and Iktomi in North American traditions, Anansi in West African folklore, the medieval court jester, the carnival inversions of ecclesiastical hierarchy that persisted into university traditions. The fool punctures the posturing of personas and egos, bests social superiors, and transgresses conventional morality, flaunting and taunting with shadow material, making cultural truths both pointed and palatable. This Jungian life's clinical reading extends the trickster into the structure of dreaming itself. Dreams are read as emerging from the inner fool, capable of shocking an ego made complacent, the fool functioning as the unconscious itself, in close and paradoxical relationship with the self, light and dark. The trickster, in this reading, is not external to the psyche. It is a description of how the unconscious behaves when it needs to be heard. Section 3, the Puer Aeternus. The second concept is structurally different from the trickster, though frequently confused with it. The Puer Aeternus describes an arrested developmental pattern, psychological youth that refuses to convert into psychological maturity. Jung described the eternal child in man as an indescribable experience, an incongruity, a handicap, and a divine prerogative, an imponderable that determines the ultimate worth or worthlessness of a personality. The formulation is deliberately double-edged. The pure is not simply immaturity to be corrected, It carries creative and spiritual material that a purely disciplined psyche cannot access. Jung paired this archetype with its opposite, the senex, the old man, the structure of discipline and order. The Puer's shadow is the senex associated with Apollo, disciplined, controlled, rational, ordered. The senex's shadow, in turn, is the Puer, associated with Dionysus, unbounded, instinctive, disordered, whimsical. Neither archetype functions safely alone. Both live within the same psyche, and a one-sided imbalance toward either pole is not advisable. A person governed entirely by the Puer cannot commit to structure, schooling, or sustained responsibility. A person governed entirely by the senex loses access to spontaneity, play, and renewal. Contemporary culture supplies abundant material for this pattern. Peter Pan as its literary origin point, the modern man-child figure in film and television as its recurring update. The Puer Aeternus is glorified in media that idealizes carefree youth and penalized in cultural narratives about arrested development. The same archetype read as either gift or pathology depending on the angle of the camera. Section 4. The popularized fool. The internet-native 12 Jungian Archetypes framework sits downstream of both concepts above, condensed for accessibility. It is worth examining on its own terms, with its origin acknowledged rather than obscured. The most quoted formulation comes not from Jung, but from psychologist Jordan Peterson, commenting on Jung's work. One of the things I've learned from Jung that is so unlikely is that the fool is the precursor to the savior, or sage. Why? Because you're a fool when you start something new. So if you're not willing to be a fool, then you'll never start anything new. And if you never start anything new, then you won't develop. This is an interpretation of Jung, not a citation from him, a distinction worth preserving since the line is frequently presented online as though Jung wrote it himself. The popularized model also supplies a useful diagnostic frame absent from Jung's original essays, a spectrum between two failure modes. Addiction to the fool archetype produces irresponsibility, lack of focus, and excessive jokiness. Allergy to the same archetype, its suppression, produces rigidity, inhibition, and chronic overseriousness. Neither extreme is the healthy expression. Section 5. Synthesis. 3 frameworks have been presented: the trickster, the Puer Aeternus, and the popularized fool. They are not identical, but they share a common axis. Each describes a psychic structure that resists premature closure, a refusal to let a system, a personality, or a culture harden into something that can no longer adapt. The practical implication is consistent across all 3 versions. The willingness to appear foolish is a precondition for development, not an obstacle to it. Growth requires starting something before competence exists to justify it. This is the unifying claim beneath the trickster's disruption, the Puer's refusal to settle, and the popularized fool's leap toward the unknown. The next part of this series moves to the tarot. The trickster and the Puer Aeternus are psychological constructs without fixed visual form. The fool of the major arcana, by contrast, is a single image, repeated for centuries, numbered 0, standing at the edge of a cliff. That image and what it encodes is the subject of Part 2.